Welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Wu. I'm an Associate Professor in the Department of Psychology at Reykjavik University. Today, I will be presenting on circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. In terms of learning objectives, by the end of this lecture, you should be able to describe the basic functions of circadian rhythms, as I will be giving a brief recap of what circadian rhythms are and their importance in our daily life functioning. You should be able to compare and contrast the defining features of circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. I will go through some of the key diagnostic features, but for a more comprehensive overview of all of the diagnostic criteria, you should always refer to the ICSD-3 for a comprehensive overview. You should also be able to identify the key tools used to diagnose circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. And finally, to be able to recommend appropriate treatment strategies for circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. So we see circadian rhythms at different levels, from behavioral to physiological to biochemical. They're found at every level in the human body. And they are controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is our master clock, and it's housed in the hypothalamus in the brain. They are endogenous, meaning that in order to have true circadian rhythmicity, they should continue even with no stimulation from outside. In other words, they are intrinsically rhythmic. And they are supposed to prepare the body for restful sleep at some times of the day and active wakefulness at others. And finally, you should know that although I said that the circadian rhythms are approximately 24-hour cycles of rhythmicity, they're actually slightly longer than 24 hours. And since circadian rhythms are slightly longer than 24 hours, they therefore need to be entrained to the external 24-hour physical environment. And the light-dark cycle is the strongest Zeitgeber or time giver of the circadian system via light's effects on intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. If you look at the top right, you can see a figure that's demonstrating this. So light hits the eye, stimulates these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, and those cells project to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is our master clock in the brain. So what that means is that light can be engaged to eventually shift our circadian system or regulate it as need be. And you should also know that these cells in the eyes are actually part of the non-visual system. Light exposure that's given before the core body temperature minimum, which occurs in the evening, will delay the circadian system and make it later. So I've drawn this core body temperature rhythm in the bottom part of the figure there. So if light exposure is given before the core body temperature minimum, then it will delay the circadian rhythm, but if it's given after the core body temperature minimum in the early morning, it will make it earlier, it will advance it. The suprachiasmatic nucleus also receives internal signals from the pineal gland via the nocturnal release of melatonin. So endogenous melatonin release begins about 2 to 3 hours before sleep onset and peaks in the middle of the night, and that can be seen in the figure on the right. So light exposure can actually suppress melatonin release, by the way. So that's why when people are exposed to too much light at night, melatonin release goes down. So they're kind of almost opposites in terms of their way of regulating the circadian rhythm. So in contrast to light, melatonin during the early morning delays circadian rhythm timing. It makes it later. But melatonin in the early evening advances, brings it earlier in the timing. So as you can see from the figure, melatonin levels fluctuate across the 24-hour light-dark cycle, and melatonin synthesis and release occurs in dim light typically and is inhibited by daytime light. So hold on to this information. This information tells us about how circadian rhythms are entrained using light and melatonin. In terms of circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders, they have a number of characteristics. They consist of alterations of the circadian timekeeping system, its entrainment mechanisms, or misalignment of the endogenous circadian rhythm and the external environment. They manifest as insomnia, excessive sleepiness, or some combination of both, and they cause clinically significant distress or impairment in mental, physical, social, occupational, educational, or other important areas of functioning. When we assess these disorders, there are some general approaches that are used that I will discuss a little more later on. But typically these approaches are used to estimate the endogenous circadian timing, which is essential for accurate diagnosis. And this can be through the use of sleep logs, actigraphy, and actigraphy basically are kind of similar to Fitbits. You typically wear them on your wrist, and they measure the movement of the wrist, and it's said to be a proxy of physical activity. So typically we like to see more activity during the day and almost no activity at night to signify rest or sleep. And we like to measure sleep logs and actigraphy actually for 7 to 14 days to ensure that it captures free days and work days. We also use circadian chronotype questionnaires such as the Munich chronotype questionnaire or the morningness-eveningness questionnaire. They actually measure circadian preference, so whether you're a night owl or a morning lark. And also physiological measures can be used, such as salivary or plasma dim light melatonin onset, and also urinary measures of acrophase are possible as well. These are the primary circadian sleep-wake disorders that are listed in the ICSD-3, and they will be discussed in greater detail as I go through this talk today. The first disorders I want to talk about are delayed and advanced sleep-wake phase disorders. So in this figure here, we have a typical phase of a typical person who has no sleep disorder. In this example, the person becomes sleepy and goes to bed at around 11 and wakes up at 7 a.m. For someone who has a delayed phase disorder, these individuals exhibit a sleep-wake cycle that is delayed by at least 2 hours usually when compared to the general population, and the condition needs to last for at least 3 months to meet criteria. And typically these individuals have difficulty falling asleep and waking up. But if the person is allowed to sleep at times that are consistent with their endogenous rhythm, sleep duration and quality are typically perfectly normal. So as you can imagine, if someone has this delayed rhythm, what happens is they try to go to bed at the required time. Maybe this person who actually feels sleepy at 2 a.m. wants to go to sleep at 11 p.m., but it takes a long time for them to feel sleepy and fall asleep. And then in the morning, they feel like they haven't gotten enough sleep, so they'll be very sleepy. And this is very difficult, especially if the person has work or school obligations. And often they will experience excessive morning sleep inertia. Sleep inertia is that period right after you wake up in the morning when you feel really groggy. It can last about half an hour to an hour, and you can feel quite disoriented. That can be pretty excessive in these individuals because they're waking up during their normal sleep, what would feel like their normal sleep period. And the symptoms to meet criteria cannot be due to another sleep medical condition or mental disorder or substance use. This goes for all of the disorders I present today. So the prevalence of delayed sleep-wake phase disorder typically hover around 1% of the general population, and it's more common among adolescents and young adults. There are a number of predisposing and precipitating factors of this disorder. Most individuals with this disorder are evening chronotypes. I mentioned that it's more common among adolescents, and that actually may be because adolescents often have a later chronotype or later bedtimes during that period of their life. Also, genetic factors may also contribute to the risks of having delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, such as polymorphisms in the circadian clock genes. Environmental factors may also exacerbate the delayed circadian phase, and these include increased exposure to bright light, particularly late in the evening, or because of the delayed schedules, they may have decreased exposure to light early in the morning because they typically want to wake up later. In addition, if people are consuming too much coffee or caffeine or other stimulants, that may further delay sleep onset and make this delayed sleep time even worse. There's also social contributors. Personal, social, and occupational activities that may continue into the late evening may also perpetuate or exacerbate this sleep phase delay. There's also potential maladjustment to changes in academic, occupational, or social schedules. People may also have issues with this if they travel across time zones or engage in shift work. I will be talking about jet lag disorder and shift work disorder later on, but those two experiences can also precipitate delayed sleep-wake phase disorder as well. Now, again, this is the typical sleep phase of a normal person without sleep disorder, but for someone with an advanced phase, they will exhibit a sleep-wake cycle that is advanced by at least 2 hours when compared with the conventional times and symptoms, as you can see there. So it's earlier, and the symptoms persist for at least 3 months. And patients typically present with symptoms of difficulty staying awake late at night, and they wake up very early. And so what happens is these individuals tend to fall asleep between 6 and 9 p.m. and wake up between 2 and 5 a.m. And as with the delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, when they are given permission to sleep at a self-chosen schedule, their sleep quality and duration is just fine. And again, the symptoms cannot be due to any other condition. And they may also sometimes experience chronic partial sleep loss because they're always waking up too early. But also, interestingly, these individuals sometimes experience better resilience, well-being, and less depression. In terms of demographics, the prevalence of this disorder is around 1% of the general population, and there are no significant sex differences. In terms of predisposing and precipitating factors, typically this occurs more in older adults who tend to show greater morningness. There are also genetic factors that may come into play. There are familial cohorts who show specific gene mutations. Also, children with specific neurodevelopmental disorders may exhibit advanced sleep-wake phase disorder, such as children with autism or Smith-Magenis syndrome. Also, certain populations may have a tendency towards increased morningness traits, such as in African and certain Mayan populations. In terms of the assessment of delayed and advanced sleep-wake phase disorder, we would use a sleep log, so we would have the person complete a sleep log, typically recording their sleep and wake times and how long it took them to fall asleep, if they woke up earlier than they actually wanted to, and if they woke up during the night. And we have people complete that for 7 to 14 days. Same with actigraphy. And also chronotype questionnaires that indicate their circadian preference. And optionally, we may ask them to do salivary dim light melatonin onset testing. So basically we have, if patients do this kind of DILMO testing, we have them give saliva samples on the hour about 5 hours before their habitual bedtime. So maybe beginning 5 hours before they go to sleep, they would have a salival sample every hour until 1 hour after their habitual bedtime. And what we want to see is when the melatonin rises, and that sort of indicates the timing of their circadian rhythm. So in general, these assessment tools help us determine whether it is a phase disorder of these types. Here's an example of a patient with delayed sleep-wake phase disorder and findings from their actogram and their DILMO testing. On the left, we see the actogram derived from actigraphy data obtained over 9 days in a patient with severe delayed sleep phase disorder. The yellow lines, which are a bit faint in this picture, depict light exposure. The high amplitude dense bars are representative of wakefulness, and what we want to see is no to low activity or at night, which is representative of sleep. Average sleep onset for this individual is actually 5 to 6 a.m. and wake time is from noon to 1 p.m., so they're going to bed extremely late. On the right, we see their 24-hour plasma melatonin level. Typically, we can get this melatonin rise with saliva, but in this article, they showed plasma melatonin. And we can see when the rise is, and it's delayed. It actually occurs at 1:23 a.m. in this person, which is about 5 hours later than a typical individual. Here's an actogram and DILMO testing of an advanced sleep-wake phase disordered patient. And again, it's over 9 days. And what we see is their average sleep onset here is 8 to 9 p.m. and wake time is 4 to 5 a.m. DILMO is around 7:30 p.m., which is a few hours earlier than what would be expected in a non-advanced person. So when we think about treatments for these disorders, I want you to think back to my earlier slides that showed the importance of light and melatonin in training circadian rhythms, because the main treatment strategies for these disorders are light therapy and low-dose melatonin. So if you remember, under a typical phase, melatonin typically rises a couple of hours before bedtime. But in the case of delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, especially if it's truly circadian-driven, melatonin is probably rising too late in the evening. So you would prescribe low-dose melatonin about 5 hours before their habitual bedtime, and then a bright light therapy prescribed about 30 minutes to 2 hours upon awakening, as you can see in the figure there. In the case of advanced sleep-wake phase disorder, we want to delay their circadian timing, so we would use bright light therapy prescribed in the evening between 7 and 9 p.m. to essentially keep them awake for a little longer. Next, we have irregular sleep-wake rhythm disorder. And this disorder is characterized by an irregular pattern of sleep, usually with at least three distinct sleep periods occurring during a 24-hour period. And typically patients or their caregivers or loved ones will tell us that the patient has symptoms of insomnia, excessive daytime sleepiness, or both, and symptoms must last at least 3 months. Symptoms are not explained by any other condition. So the figure on the right, you can see the sleep period is kind of in, there's a grey background, and the actual sleep times are in black. And you can see there's multiple bouts throughout the 24-hour day, characteristic of this disorder. The prevalence of this disorder increases with age, though it's likely due to age-related increases in neurodegenerative disorders, because this disorder is typically connected more with neurodegeneration for the most part. There are a number of predisposing and precipitating factors, particularly neurodevelopmental disorders in children, neurodegenerative disorders in older adults, and brain injuries. And the reason why these may be risk factors is that these conditions may be associated with functional abnormalities in the circadian system or altered melatonin secretion profiles. Environmental factors may also predispose or precipitate this disorder, such as poor sleep hygiene, poor sleep habits basically, or conditions. Lack of external synchronizing agents such as light, activity, or social schedules to kind of cue the circadian system to be awake at certain times and asleep at other times. And this is of particular note in institutionalized elderly who have this problem a lot. In terms of the assessment of this disorder, we use the usual tools such as sleep log or and actigraphy, sometimes PSG is indicated to identify potential comorbid sleep conditions that may also be contributing to the onset or the manifestation of this disorder. If we do have someone wear an actigraph, we see on the actigram the following, as illustrated on the right. This is a person with irregular sleep-wake rhythm disorder. It's double plotted over 17 days. And when I say double plotted, I mean that each day is put also to the right of the days, so you can compare one day to the next more readily, both up and down. Both across and down. And this is a person with a neurologic disorder. So as you can see, this patient has multiple sleep-wake episodes across 24 hours, with multiple wake episodes signified by the density of activity at night and irregular sleep periods during the day. And in this patient, sleep has mostly occurred at night. You can kind of see that band, that kind of gap in the middle. That it shows that they tried to stick to the schedule, but it just wasn't working. So there's a lack of a defined circadian rhythm, and there's multiple sleep bouts over the 24 hours. The treatment for this condition basically consists of attempting to consolidate nocturnal sleep using a mixed modality approach. So for this condition, we would want to encourage exposure to daytime bright light, whether it be through light therapy lamps or going outside or sitting by a window. And in children, we might prescribe melatonin towards bedtime. And for all ages, structured activities during the day and winding down by nighttime. Unfortunately, melatonin doesn't seem to help those with dementia, so it's not usually indicated for use in older adults. And now I'm going to talk about non-24-hour sleep-wake rhythm disorder. This is where a person experiences symptoms of insomnia, excessive daytime sleepiness, or both due to a misalignment between their internal circadian rhythm and the 24-hour day, and it needs to last at least 3 months, similar to the other conditions. As usual, the symptoms are not explained by other conditions. So essentially, individuals with this disorder cannot entrain to the 24-hour day. Instead, they follow their own endogenous circadian period. So if you remember early on, I said that our circadian rhythms are actually slightly longer than 24 hours. So in these people, for whatever reason, the environmental cueing or other internal cues are not helping the person regulate their circadian rhythm or align their circadian rhythm to the 24-hour day. So their sleep-wake pattern actually moves progressively later every day, and eventually they're sleeping. When they should be sleeping, they're actually awake, and when they should be awake, they're asleep. So the night and day kind of swap around and then swap back again. Over half of totally blind individuals have non-24-hour sleep-wake rhythm disorder. And prevalence figures, we have few prevalence figures out there, but there was a study done in the European Union, and it was determined to be around 0.03%, so very rare. In terms of predisposing and precipitating factors, as I mentioned, in totally blind people, the absence of light impairs circadian synchronization, and in some, this leads to gradual drift of their circadian rhythms following the underlying period of their biological clock. Now, it should be noted that if a person who is blind has, if their non-visual system is still intact in their eyes, they still may be able to receive cues from environmental light to regulate their circadian rhythm. But unfortunately, especially in the old days, blind people were often encouraged to wear dark glasses, which made their non-24-hour disorders worse. So it's important to also rule out whether their eyes have complete blindness where they have no non-visual system there, or if it's still intact. Environmental factors may also contribute to this disorder, such as decreased or inappropriately timed exposure to circadian entrainers, such as light at the wrong times of day or not enough light during the day. And also other conditions may trigger this disorder or precipitate this disorder, such as delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, as well as its treatment may predispose a person to this. Traumatic brain injury also may contribute to this. In terms of assessment, we use sleep logs as usual, actigraphy. It's also optional, but Dilmo testing may also be done either with saliva or urine. And this really just establishes whether their sleep-wake rhythms are truly following those natural shifts. This is what it would look like on an actigram. The sleep-wake pattern is moving progressively later and later every day, eventually alternating between sleeping during the night and sleeping during the day. Treatment. In blind individuals, low-dose melatonin is administered 1 hour before the habitual bedtime. And in sighted individuals, bright light upon awakening is useful, as well as encouraging them to adhere to a regular sleep-wake schedule and also optional melatonin towards bedtime. As mentioned, if this, if the blind individual's non-visual system is intact, bright light upon awakening may also be helpful for even visually impaired individuals. I found this infographic, which I thought was a really great illustration of the different disorders that we've just discussed so far. You can see at the top there typical sleep-wake phase. Then you've got the delayed one underneath that and the advanced sleep-wake phase disorder beneath that. Then we have the irregular sleep-wake disorder there with the multiple bouts across the 24-hour day. And finally, the non-24-hour disordered person where it's gradually shifting to the right. And now I'm going to talk about shift work disorder. This disorder is characterized by insomnia or excessive sleepiness in association with work hours that occur at least or in part during the usual sleep episode, and this needs to happen for at least 3 months. There are several types of shift work schedules, including evening shifts, night shifts, early morning shifts, rotating shifts, split shifts, on-call overnight duty, and long-duration work shifts that may include work hours at night. But sleep disturbance is usually most common in those working night shifts and early morning shifts and rotating shifts. Total sleep time for the major sleep episode is usually curtailed by 1 to 4 hours, and sleep quality is often poor in these individuals. For those working early morning shifts, it often results in poor sleep initiation and difficulty waking up. Those who work permanent evening shifts may have trouble maintaining their sleep during the day. And many may experience excessive sleep at work or the need to nap. Mental acuity may be impaired, and these issues may compromise their ability to do their jobs safely. There might be more risk of accidents, and commuting may even be dangerous when driving to and from work. And even when environmental conditions are optimized, it can still be a problem for these individuals. And often a large part of free time may be spent in recovery sleep with adverse social consequences. People might have greater mood problems, impatience, interpersonal issues with co-workers, impaired social functioning, and lower coping skills. Also, they might end up with greater health complaints and psychological issues, etc. In terms of the demographics of this disorder, 20 to 30% of the workforces in industrialized countries are in jobs that require shift work. and the estimated prevalence is around 2 to 5% of the general population. The prevalence among rotating and night shift workers is 10 to 38%. In terms of predisposing and precipitating factors, circadian preference may influence one's ability to adjust or tolerate shift work. For example, a morning lark, someone who's a morning person, who has to work evening shifts may actually struggle more than a natural night owl. High sleep reactivity may also make a person more vulnerable to shift work disorder. In other words, if they very easily woken up by noise or other stresses. And those with comorbid medical, psychiatric, or other sleep conditions may also be at particular risk. Older age also increases the risk of shift work disorder. And social pressures outside of work may also increase the risk. So if you think of, say, someone who has a lot of family responsibilities and they're working the night shift, they may be forced to get up to take their kids to school or pick them up, and that might be during their sleep period. In terms of shift work disorder assessment, we may use sleep logs and actigraphy to determine if there is a disrupted sleep-wake pattern, and PSG is optional to rule out sleep apnea or narcolepsy. Indeed, if one looks at an actogram of someone with shift work, we see an example to the left here of a patient with shift work disorder. You can see that as the person moves from daytime work to nighttime work, that sleep efficiency declines, going from in the 90s down to the 70s later on in the week. And there's greater sleep fragmentation, meaning that when they're trying to sleep, they're waking up a lot, etc. And sleep efficiency, by the way, is the percent of time that the person is actually asleep during their time in bed. So PSG and or actigraphy may generally show poor sleep quality, fragmentation, prolonged sleep latency, meaning time to fall asleep, or sleep maintenance problems, as well as shortened total sleep time. And if DILMO is available, one can also measure the degree of misalignment from their natural circadian rhythm. The treatment is typically to align the circadian rhythm to the work schedule using sleep hygiene techniques, maybe bright light, intermittent exposure at work, and to avoid bright light in the early morning, for example. If they've come home from work early in the morning and they need to sleep, they should avoid bright light, and maybe low-dose melatonin just prior to their sleep time. To address excessive sleepiness, they may be prescribed wakefulness-promoting medications, and scheduled naps and caffeine. And for those with insomnia symptoms, they may be prescribed melatonin before bed and hypnotics. Finally, we're going to talk about jet lag disorder. This is a complaint of insomnia or excessive daytime sleepiness accompanied by a reduction of total sleep time associated with travel across at least 2 time zones, and impairment of daytime function, general malaise, or somatic symptoms, for example, gastrointestinal disturbance, within 1 to 2 days after travel. So essentially, jet lag disorder is a temporary mismatch between the timing of the sleep-wake cycle from the internal endogenous circadian clock and that of the sleep-wake pattern that's required by the change in time zone. So these graphs to the left show the time course of jet lag in two groups of people. So it's reporting jet lag symptoms after traveling west or traveling east. And the dark line, so the one on the left is westerly travel, the one on the right is easterly travel. The dark lines indicate those with at least moderate jet lag, and the light line is those with no jet lag. And the horizontal thresholds are just cutoffs for moderate and severe jet lag. You can see the travel day is indicated by a number 0, and the day after the travel day is indicated by the number 1 on the x-axis. And you can see in both groups that on day 1, there are significantly greater reports of jet lag, but it's worse in those traveling east. In terms of demographics, it affects everyone. It affects all ages, sex, and racial groups. And in fact, a global survey found that among a sample of international student travelers from the US, 7% were diagnosed with jet lag disorder upon returning home. But yes, it can affect all age groups. Predisposing and precipitating factors include disturbed sleep, prolonged wakefulness, or shortened sleep duration before and during travel. That may contribute to jet lag symptoms. Also, if someone is experiencing prolonged uncomfortable sitting positions, poor air quality or differences in air quality and pressure, stress, and maybe excessive caffeine and alcohol consumption, those factors may increase the severity of these insomnia symptoms and impair alertness and function associated with transmeridian travel. Eastward travel tends to result in difficulties with sleep onset because the person is trying to sleep at an earlier internal circadian time. So they're trying to sleep at an earlier time when the biological clock is promoting alertness. And in terms of westward travel, this can result in sleepiness in evening hours as the internal clock is actually promoting sleep. They may have a sleep maintenance issue because the circadian clock is actually promoting wakefulness. It's their biological day during the latter part of their sleep episode. So they might wake up too early and have difficulties going back to sleep. And eastward travel is usually worse. And incidentally, just out of interest, east-west jet lag effects have also been evident in studies of professional baseball players in the US. So there was a study done by Northwestern that studied baseball players, and they found that when they traveled east, they had more jet lag effects that impaired baseball performance more than westward travel. Innate circadian preference may confer greater or lesser ability to adjust the time shift. And the severity and duration of the jet lag disorder may depend on the number of time zones traveled, the ability to sleep while traveling, and appropriate exposure to circadian time cues at the destination, as well as tolerance to circadian misalignment during the biological night. So if they're intolerant, it may be more difficult. In terms of an assessment, usually no assessment is indicated. It usually resolves on its own, though it can take longer to resolve the more time zones one has travelled. But one can try to prevent jet lag by doing what is indicated in this graphic here. This is a circadian-based treatment plan for someone travelling east from LA to Paris. The triangles represent the minimum of her core body temperature rhythm. The L signifies when the person should seek light, and D when to seek dark, and M is the time to take low-dose melatonin. And here the person is encouraged to seek light right after waking and to take low-dose melatonin a few hours before bedtime. And in order to start bringing that circadian rhythm to earlier, the protocol is gradually moved earlier and earlier until the person hits their target time zone. What I like about this graphic is it also highlights when you should cover your eyes when you're on the plane. Here's a jet lag disorder treatment plan for those traveling east, traveling nonstop, for example, from Los Angeles to Paris with no pre-flight preparation. So here the person lands when it's technically bedtime in LA, but it's morning in Paris. So they are encouraged to seek light upon landing and then seek dark after their minimal core body temperature, which would normally be in the middle of the night in LA, but is at around 2 p.m. in Paris. So to adjust to the later time, they should shift those protocols later and later until the person has adjusted. For someone traveling west, say from Paris to Los Angeles with no pre-flight preparation, for this example, the person lands when it is bedtime, for them, but it is in LA, it's only the early afternoon. So the protocol is to seek light immediately, and when their core body temperature is at a minimum, at about 7 p.m. LA time, they should seek dark. And they should keep applying this protocol later and later each day until they hit their target bedtime. Some final points. There is an additional diagnostic category in the ICSD-3 called circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorder not otherwise specified. And this is used when a person meets all the general diagnostic criteria, but not for a specific disorder. And this may be kind of a holding diagnosis or temporary diagnosis until a specific one is established following intensive assessment. All of the disorders result in significant impairment, so timely assessment and treatment has the potential to improve quality of life. And although circadian preference is relatively stable across adulthood, some flexibility exists, and interventions like light therapy, melatonin, and sleep hygiene can help shift timing to an extent, even if the natural preference remains. And finally, treatments aim to optimize circadian rhythms by better aligning circadian rhythms with the environment, with the social and occupational schedules that the person is living within, in order to improve physical and mental outcomes and health and well-being. Here are some readings that you may refer to. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine actually has a summary of the ICSD-3 text revision outline of these disorders in a document that I've listed there that covers most of the material that I've discussed today. And the second article, written about 9 years ago, was written by a team at Northwestern who actually are researchers in sleep and circadian rhythms, and they actually have an active clinic there. And this paper is actually very good at describing the treatments. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and if you have questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me.